Hi, today we're going to work on a princess seam bodice. And the first thing you want to do is prepare your fabric. I'm going to be working in half scale because I think it's easier for you to see than if I was working on the half scale. So mine's full, yours is half. So I'll try to remember when I'm talking about measurements to think about what you're actually working on. So the first thing we want to do is prepare our fabric. So I've cut my fabric based on measuring from the high point of shoulder down to the waist and adding 4 inches. So my samples are 20 inches long. Yours most likely will be about 12 inches long. If you look at your dress form here, a 12-inch piece of fabric is going to give you plenty of space to manipulate your fabric. Let me move this over. There, you can see that better. And then you want to check the width. So you go from the center of the bodice across the fullness of the bust to the underarm seam. And I've got 10 inches here, and I've cut my muslin at 10 inches wide, because right now what we're going to do is we're working from the center to the princess seam. So if I add an inch here and I add a couple inches over here to make sure that I've taken into consideration the fullest part, and being able to turn under the front edge 1 inch is going to give me about a 10-inch piece, a little bit more, a little less. Your bodice, you can see if I add an inch at the front and go across to the bust and add a little bit more fabric to work at, I would say that most of your pieces are going to be 12 by 5 inches. So it's a good idea to have your fabric ready to go, all 4 pieces, and I lay them in order of my center front, my side front piece, which will be here, my side back piece will be here, and my center back, and I've marked them as such. Your center front piece, you want to remember that you need to mark an inch, and you're going to turn that under and press it. And then what I've done up here is remove some of the neckline. If you're following along in your textbook, you're going to be on page 147. And so on your half scale, I would say you're going to come over about 3/4 of an inch, and you're going to go down about 2 inches, and you're just going to make an angled line, and you're going to trim that away. And then we're also dropping down, maybe 1/4 of an inch, and putting a little line with an X so you know that that's your seam allowance. You don't want to put the cut edge down here. You need to leave room to create a seam allowance. Your side front, you're going to have a line down the center. That's the grain line, so that we make sure that we don't skew this. And then at the bottom, you want to slash your fabric a little bit so that you can get started with being able to follow that curve. So that's how you would prep your side front. Your side back is pretty much the same as the side front. You want the grain line down the center of the fabric, and you want to slash a little bit at the bottom. And then your center back piece, you're going to mark and turn under 1 inch for your center back. And then at the neckline area, we're going to take away about 3/4 of an inch going this way, and a little bit more than 3/4 of an inch, but not quite an inch. And again, go down about 1/4 inch, make that little X and a line so that you know that you're leaving room for your seam allowance. And then you can cut those pieces away. So I'm going to start with my center front. I'm going to trim my fabric. So to begin, we're going to start with our center front panel. So you'll be draping from the center front over to the princess line. Because we've used in the past a horizontal balance line, I use horizontal balance lines on everything. Your textbook isn't showing you using that horizontal balance line, but I think it's a good practice to get into. If you watch some other videos on YouTube, you will see that they've used that horizontal balance line. So basically what you can do is you can come to your dress form, line that X up with the neck, make a little mark here, and then lay your fabric down and square up the line across the bust. So to drape the front, we're going to pin the center front on that stitching line that's on your dress form. Hopefully your small form, you have like a little ribbon down the front. I don't really like to have a ribbon on my large dress form. It just seems to get in the way. It's thick, and I want to see the actual stitching on the cover of my dress form as to where that center line is. So I'm going to pin it at the neckline, pin it at the bust, and pin it at the waist. And then your next step is you're smoothing the fabric up around the neck. Now, in order to get to the shoulder, you can see if I do this, it starts to kind of flap down, and it's going to start to create some wrinkles. So I'm going to need to slash this the same way I would slash a curved seam in order to release the fabric and allow it to follow the shoulder and drape. So every so many inches, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to cut into our fabric. Be careful that when you're doing this that you don't poke holes in your dress form, especially the really antique-y ones that we've lent you, because I can't keep replacing them if they're damaged. So I'm just cutting down probably every ½ inch or so on your smaller dress form and releasing the fabric in this neck area so that I'm able to smooth it and go up over the shoulder with your hand. And you can see that this is really nice and smooth. I have no diagonal lines. Whenever you see diagonal lines, what those are stress lines. That tells me that the fabric is fighting what I'm trying to do with it. So I'm going to take a few pins and I'm going to sort of just pin it at the neckline. And then I'm going to smooth across the shoulder. So I'm coming over here. We're not worried about this over here because we're only coming to the princess line. So then what I'm going to do is come across the neck and the shoulder, and I want to pin it. I'm pinning it right at that high point of shoulder where the neck and the shoulder line come together. And then I'm coming across and I'm putting a pin at where the princess seam intersects the shoulder. So over here, and then I'm going to start coming down and I'm going to push this down and I'm going to work on my waistline. I really want this to be smooth. Try not to pull on your fabric because we don't want things to be super tight. So I'm coming down to my waistline, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come across the waist, just a little bit here, and I'm going to slash the fabric here, maybe a couple of times. I think your book is showing like at least one. And again, because our hips are wider than our waist, the fabric can't make that bend here at the waistline. This is going to restrict and pull the fabric over here. So I just want to come over and create that waistline. I'm even going to go over to the princess seam and slash it there too. So I really can get this fabric to lay nice and smooth. Now, one thing you need to do is make sure that you're allowing a little bit of wearing ease. So in this area, you don't really want to pull on this and make it skin tight, but you don't want to push over and leave a lot flopping around. So the princess seam, what's happening is we're taking the excess fabric that we would have made a dart at the waist, or excess fabric that we would have made a dart at the bust area, and that is moving into the princess seam. And you'll see when you lay the two pieces down after you've mapped this out, that there's some curvature, especially to the side panel, and that's where your excess material from the dart has actually gone into this seam and created a curve. So I'm also going to pin it here at the bust so that my fabric doesn't drop down as I'm pinning my waist. So pin your waistline at the princess seam. Oops, that's going to fall out. And you don't need to put like 5 or 6 pins. Again, remember, don't pull, because when you pull this, what's happening is you're going to pull the center over. So I'm just softly bringing this over and I'm putting a pin in it. And then the same thing up here. A couple of pins for the shoulder. And then you're going to take your pencil or whatever you're using to mark your seams, and you're going to mark everything. when the excess fabric on this side is coming towards the bust, we need to create a couple of notches that we're going to line it up, because if we don't have notches, what's going to happen is when you sew these two pieces together, you're going to push the excess fabric that we've used for the bust down off the bottom of the dress. And then what's going to happen is you're going to have a bust line that actually is flattening someone's bust, making it really uncomfortable. So on your half scale dress form, you're actually going to pin an inch above and an inch below, and those are going to become your notches. At my full scale, it's going to be 2 inches. So I'm going 2 inches above, and this is where I'm going to create a notch, and 2 inches below the bust, I'm going to create a notch. So remember, half scale 1 inch. When you get to full scale, it'll be 2 inches. And I'm going to create a notch at that point. So a notch is going to just be a horizontal line that tells me where this center front is going to attach to my side front. So now I'm going to mark my neckline. And I don't draw a continuous line, especially if I'm working with a marker. If I was using a pencil, I would have done a continuous line, because I'm going to join these when I true it up with a ruler. And so I'm going to come across my shoulder. I've got basically sort of a T shape, like an intersection between the shoulder seam and your princess seam. So you're kind of making sure that you know exactly where that corner is. I often see that those areas become a gray area on people's patterns, and then they have trouble matching things because this was not specified real clear. Come down your princess line and make some lines through the bust, below the bust, down to the waist. And again, when I get to the waist, I really like to make something that sort of looks like a T or an L. There's an intersection there, so I know that corner. And then I'm going across to the center front over here. Then you can take your scissors and you can trim some of the fabric away. I'm going to move these pins over out of the way so that I don't damage my scissors while I'm cutting. You're going to find you're doing a lot of pinning and unpinning to create things. I'm hoping later in the term to be able to create a video of a lot of garments that I've created through the draping process, and have like a little video that shows you some different styles and different finished fabrics, sort of as something kind of inspirational, so that when you start thinking about what you want to do for an original design, we will be talking about styles. Okay. Oh, I cut through my ribbon on the back. What a disaster. That can happen. There we go. All right. So trim everything up. Trim a little bit away from here. You don't need all that fabric flopping around and getting in your way. You can shorten up these pieces that are at the neck. I generally sort of like to have what I've cut sort of mimic what I know is going to be a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so that when I take it off, it matches up pretty well. So the next thing we're going to do is get our side panel ready to drape. And I'm going to bring it up because I want to make sure I have enough fabric to create my shoulder seam. So how far up does this need to go? You want to make sure you have more fabric at the shoulder than you do at the bottom. And I'm going to see where my balance line is and just make a little dot. And you can measure it with a tape measure. I just find it much quicker to just lay it up there and create that balance line. So to begin in draping the side panel, we want to kind of release it. Don't take it off the dress form. Just maybe push your pins over to the center front. And we are going to just fold it back out of the way so that I can drape this panel, and then I will bring it back when I want to match up my notches and what have you. So I just sort of just pin it out of the way. It's a lot easier than taking it off and putting it back on. And we're going to take the side panel and we're going to place the side panel on the form so that the straight grain is centered and perpendicular to the waistline. So I'm trying to create this line as a grain line halfway in between my side and my bust. And then what I want to do is make sure that if I'm using a balance line, that I've got that in the right spot. And I'm going to pin those two spots right there. So I'm going to come across the bust and the side where I want the grain line, and then the side seam. So what this is going to allow me to do is to make sure that my grain line is going to fall towards the ground and my garment piece isn't going to wind up getting some diagonal folds in it because the fabric's off grain. I just really can't stress enough how important understanding your grain line and how it affects the garments that you're creating. So then the next step is, once you have this pin here, you can actually, if you want to keep this out of the way, you can put a little pin up here at the shoulder, but we're not, this piece isn't going to go there. And the first thing I want to do is clip the bottom. So if I bring this down to the waist, this line, the grain line, I can see where my waistline is. I need to cut up in a couple of spots going over towards the side and towards the front. And this will allow us again to follow a curve and not have the fabric fighting it. So you can see when I do that how much this opens up. If this is tight, it's going to pull on this part and make it difficult to drape it. So next we're going to smooth our fabric along the princess line, the shoulder, and the waist in this area, and get this all worked out before we go over and do the underarm area. So I'm just going to smooth and push my fabric and up towards the shoulder. I like to sort of like make sure that this is really straight right here. What's going to happen is you're going to see you have too much fabric right there. That's okay, because that is where the dart would be. We're going to allow this to get eased in. So just go up, smooth it. Again, not pushing or pulling, just kind of gently pushing that fabric towards where we're working. And I'm going to pin it at the shoulder. I'm going to pin it out here. Boy, I'm using pins like crazy. Pins at the shoulder line. And then I'm going to go over here along our princess seam and hold that fabric in place. And then I'm going to go across here to the waist. And you can see when I do this, what's happening is it's pushing some fabric up. We don't want to pull this and try to flatten that bust line. We want to keep this smooth but comfortable for the wearer. So I'm coming across and I'm just going to pin my waistline right here and then come up under the bust. Okay, so I'm smoothing this. And you can see I have a lot of extra fabric here. So we're going to go that 2 inches above and pin it there. So I'm just going to move this pin down to about the 2-inch mark. On your dress form, again, it's 1 inch. And I'm going to go below the bust, 1 inch on your form. And where I'm pinning it to the princess line, you'll see that you have some extra fabric in this area. We need that extra fabric so that we have a comfortable draping over the bust area. And then we're going to trim some fabric away because I don't want to have all this fabric in my way. So I'm going to take a little bit of this off. Again, leave it a ½ an inch or an inch next to your princess seam so that you haven't taken too much off. You don't want to cut along that seam line. We just want to remove some fabric to make it easier to manipulate this area. So I'm coming up and I'm taking that fabric away. So it'll be easier to manipulate this and add that fullness into the front. Smooth around your armhole. We want to make sure that we pin in a little bit of ease in this area under the arm. So what I'm going to do is just pinch my fabric together, and I hope you can see this. I'm going to release this. I'm just going to fold in a teeny weeny little bit of fabric. It's not more than 1/8 of an inch, because you don't want an armhole that's floppy, but you don't want it so tight that you can't move your arms. So just fold in that little bit of ease there, and then come over under the arm. Whoops, my ease wants to pop out. Stay in there. These dress forms underneath the muslin are made of paper mache. And so you're actually pinning into, you know, sort of a cardboardy thing that's happening. So then I'm going to pin my side seam. So I'm moving this over to the side seam, and I'm going to pin the side seam. And come down to the waist and pin the side seam. And so I've smoothed this all out. In this area down here, we really want to add a little bit of wearing ease to the garment, and we can do this at that point. And again, it's really not much more than 1/8 of an inch. So sometimes right here where I've got the grain line or next to it, I'm going to pinch in just a tiny little bit of fabric, fold it over, and that's going to be my wearing ease. We don't want to pull this so tight that it strains, and when you put it on the dress form after you've done, you can't even zip it up in the back because the thing is so tight. Underneath the arm, we want to make sure that we have left some room for ease in that area. So normally you're going to mark on a full scale a 1/2 inch ease to 0. So it's not very much. On your dress form, I would say somewhere between 1/8 and 1/2 inch here under the arm. So if you see the underarm area, I usually come down and mark my side seam, and then I'll mark another little line over here, because this is what I'm going to add to my garment. And sometimes to work on the arm's eye or arm's hole, it's a good idea to take some of the fabric away so that I can really see where I'm going with this. So I'm going to cut away the extra fabric that's at the shoulder. And I'm going to cut away some of the extra fabric here that's at the waistline. So here's my waist. So I'm going to mark that with that little sort of L thing that I like to do. And I'm going to go ahead and cut off this area at the side so I don't have quite so much fabric in my way. Okay, so I'm going to mark my side seam. And if you're doing it with a pencil, you can basically just sort of rub on that area where you can feel the stitching. But I'm going to come down here, and I'm just feeling it with my finger. And so I've sort of just made a line. Like I said before, you don't need to make a solid line at this point, because you're going to true that up when you take it off the dress form. So you're looking to just sort of capture what you've done so far. So here at the princess seam, again, I'm making a little L. So I know right now that there's the bottom of my panel. I'm going to come up my bust line on the princess seam, mark that center here, all the way up. Ooh, I went a little crooked there. Okay, so there we go. Usually if I make a line that's not correct, I'll put little hash marks through it so I know that that's not my correct line. And come across your shoulder. One of the things that when you're draping, your shoulder line is not right here at the edge of the plate. It's actually, when you look at where your shoulder comes out, if this starts to bend, that's actually the sleeve. So you want to try to find that area where it's flat, and that's going to be the end of my shoulder right there. So you're away from this plate that is on your dress form. Some people like to take a narrow ribbon, like 1/8 of an inch, and mark their arm's eye. Here it's going to be about 1/4 of an inch below that plate and curve up and around. And again, I just do a series of little lines because you're going to take your curved ruler and you're going to create your armhole. Here on my full scale, I'm coming down about a ½ inch. I know if I'm up higher than that, it's going to cut into the underarm area. So I've marked everything. I'm going to trim some of this fabric away that's at the bottom. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back this piece, your center front, and I'm going to try to find the spot where those notches are. So if I bring this back over top, I can see that that's where my notch is. If I match up the center of the bust, tuck that fabric underneath there, and I'm just going to put a couple pins for a second, and I'm going to mark the notch. You cannot make a notch later on after you've taken it off the dress form because you're trying to incorporate enough fabric for it to cup the bust, and you'll have a tendency to try to make these match up when it's laying flat, and that would be totally incorrect. You would lose any of that fullness that you've created here. So I'm going to add the notch here. So that's going to be the area that we ease this fabric in. I hope you remember doing easing from your construction classes and your pattern drafting. And then we're going to move on to the side and the back. So I'm just going to leave these on my dress form for now. I find it just quicker and easier just to keep going. So I'm just kind of pinning this at the side seam, but over a little bit so that my pins are out of the way. And then we're going to move on to the other pieces.